Ask you please to put your phones on mute or on silence, or like I said, be free yourself and turn it off for an hour. So we have some Oakmont Sunday announcements. Jeff?
Quick announcement, the movie this afternoon at 2 o'clock is called The Dry. It's a wonderful mystery set in Australia during their severe drought that's going on right now. Really good film. We previewed it and recommended it for showing.
Thanks, Jeff. Do we have any other announcements?
I have one.
Okay.
Tuesday at 1 o'clock, the OVA is holding a town hall, and the theme is Oakmont contributing to the upcoming master plan for the city of Santa Rosa. Because Oakmont is sort of a kind of appendage to the city, we really have to work hard to make sure that the city thinks of us when it sets the objectives for the future. And those objectives, where they may sound like they are somewhat technical, actually become the criteria for things like building developments, determining whether there are fire stations where you need them, determining what evacuation routes are in the event of a firestorm. Little things that are of great importance to us. So everybody's invited 1 o'clock, both in person and on Zoom, and you can find out all the details by going to the OVA website.
George, do you have another announcement?
No.
Okay, that's easy. Next week, we want to wish all of you a week in advance. Happy Mother's Day. We will not be having a presentation on Sunday, but the following Sunday, this is going to be really, really fun. And for all you viewing on Zoom, this is the time to get your butts into the symposium, because we are having Tom Tremont doing the magic show here. He's going to be talking about magic and performing for us here. It will not be the same experience if you're not right here witnessing it. So we're very, very excited that Tom will come out, and I hope you will also. To finish our season on May 22nd, we have Scott Medbury. He's going to be talking about the Sonoma Botanical Gardens. So we hope to see you for both our presentations. As you see, we're not hiding the speaker. She's not here kind of in the back room or anything. So Gabriel, do you want to explain what's going on as you introduce our speaker?
I would be delighted, Virginia, and I want to inform those people who may not be aware that Virginia Katz is our new president of the Oakmont Sunday Symposium Board, and we still have George McKinney, our previous president, with us, who will be moderating. If you have questions, please put them up on chat, and we'll alternate between the audience there in person and those in the Zoom. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Arlene. Dr. Blum is a biochemist, an author, and a mountaineer of note. She's won a number of awards, including the UK Guardian's World's 100 Most Inspiring Women, and the 100 women taking the lead to save our planet, elected to the American Association for the Advancements of Science's Fellow, and the Hall of Mountaineering Excellence. She's led women's expeditions, the first women's expedition to Annapurna I, one of the 8,000 meter peaks of the Himalaya, and has written a book on that. It's called Annapurna, A Woman's Place. I met her then, and I always wanted to snag one of her t-shirts because it said "A Woman's Place" is on top, and I never got one. But she's also written some other books and has a website, and is the executive director of the Green Science Policy Institute. So she combines being a pioneer in mountaineering and in keeping our planet healthy. So I'm delighted to welcome you, Arlene. Thanks for joining us from Berkeley there, your lovely home. Over to you.
Thank you, Gabriel. I'm happy to say hello to many of you, and I wish I were there. I was just saying, as we were chatting before, that I been a lot to mountain ranges all over the world, but not really to Sonoma. I actually thought I would spend a nice weekend going hiking with people this weekend, back nearly a year ago when you invited me. But due to COVID, this is not the best weekend to come for a visit. But another time, I'd love to go to your botanical garden. That sounds like a great talk you have coming up in a couple of weeks. So I'm going to show my slides, and I'm really happy to have any questions, comments, whatever people would like to say afterwards or even during. I don't mind. Let's see. This is going to work. There we go. Okay, so the topic is the title of my book, which is Breaking Trail, A Climbing Life. So I'm going to talk about breaking trail both in the mountains and in the world of chemical molecules. And okay, I need to click this. I'll advance. So I'm going to start just by introducing the Green Science Policy Institute, which I founded and now lead. We're scientists. We write scientific papers, bring decision makers together from government, business, NGOs, academia, and then we communicate the science widely. And working together, we've been able to successfully change government policy and also business and industries, manufacturing and purchasing processes, so that we can all have products without harmful chemicals, and indeed our population and our environment can all be healthier. So I feel very lucky that this is the mountain I'm now climbing. But it all started back at Reed College in Portland, Oregon. Here I am as a freshman in college, and my freshman chemistry professor, Jane Schell, who was only like 23 and had a doctorate in chemistry from MIT. It was very inspirational. And she thought chemistry was the coolest thing on the planet, so I became a chemist. My lab partner was a handsome young man from Portland, Oregon, and he was a mountain climber. And late one starry night, we studied chemistry, and he said, "Do you want to go climb Mount Hood?" And I said, "Sure," even though I was from Chicago and I'd never done anything physical really in my life. And but he was very handsome. So we started about 3 a.m, and I was not in good shape. I was gasping for breath, but he was very handsome. So I kept going, and the sun rose, and it was one of the most beautiful places I'd ever been. And so I continued climbing mountains and doing chemistry. In the late 60s, I just passed my qualifying exams for my doctorate in chemistry at Berkeley. And I heard about a guided climb of Denali, the highest mountain in North America. And a lot of my climbing partners were going. They were all guys, but I thought, I wonder if I could climb Denali. And so I applied to go, and the leader said, "Well, we can't have women on our trip. They can go to base camp and help with the cooking, but women aren't physically strong enough or emotionally stable enough to climb high mountains." That's what people said. This was 1969. And I was really surprised, because I'd climbed nearly as high as Denali in Peru, but had been with my friends from Reed College, and they were all guys. I was the only woman. I was pretty sure I did my share, but he sort of indicated that women really couldn't do their share. So I thought, I wonder if a team of all women could climb Denali, and organized the Denali Damsels back in 1970. And we were the first group of women to attempt Denali. And in those days, nowadays, people, when they climb mountains like Denali, they pull their gear on a sled. To climb Denali, you had to bring like 30 days of food, and particularly in those days, food and equipment weighed a lot. So we each had 200 pounds of gear to carry up the mountain. And lots of people thought women just couldn't do that. We carried it like in 3 carries, about 50 or 60 or 70 pounds at a time, because we hadn't figured out. Nowadays, people just pull it on a sled, which is much smarter. But we were able to carry it, and we got up quite high. This is the West Buttress. That's what the route is named at. It leads up to about 17,000 feet. And I always say, when you're climbing in a place like this on a narrow ridge, it's like a high altitude meditation, because where you put your foot determines if you live or die. And so you really focus on your breathing, your stepping. And we got up to the high camp here at 17,000 feet. And this is our leader, Grace Holman. I'd organized the trip, but at the time I was like 25 and I was the deputy leader. And she was a very experienced Alaskan climber who had lots of first ascents in Alaska, but mostly mountains that were not especially high. And Denali is quite high. And it turned out she wasn't good at altitude. And she was really feeling poorly on our summit day. And I suggested she rest and try again another day, but she was very determined. And we reached the top, but she was not well. She's sort of the lower right kind of slumped down. And so this was the first time a team of women did climb Denali. But right below the summit, Grace collapsed unconscious. And so I became the leader of this expedition with an unconscious person. And there was actually a big storm we could see heading in, big clouds. So it was one of those critical moments in your life where we had a sleeping bag and a pack frame for a stretcher, and we bundled her up. And then we lowered and dragged her down the mountain. And then it was starting to get dark. And so we lowered her along here. And this was kind of, oops, wrong way. Let me see. Yeah, this was kind of a steep place. And so another climber and I bivvied. That means we were there without gear, watching the clouds come in while it was dark. And then we did manage to get her down. And as she went lower, she felt better. And we got down to, and the storm came in, but we came down in the storm. And here we are at about 14,000 feet, blizzard for about 5 days, having to go out every few hours and shovel off the tent so it didn't collapse. And that was, kind of a very transformational experience for me. I grew up with really negative messages when I was a child. My memoir, Breaking Trail, talks a lot about my very difficult childhood. And I really didn't have a lot of self-confidence, but I remembered sitting in this tent in the blizzard thinking, wow, I got Grace down the mountain. Maybe I'm okay. So it gave me a real boost of confidence. And my next kind of big change was when I was just finishing my thesis in graduate school. And I was doing my last experiment, and I'd spent a long time preparing this sample for the last experiment. And then I dropped it and it broke. I'm not a very good experimentalist. And I was discouraged. So I went to the movies. And the North Side Theater by UC Berkeley, some of you know it, was playing a movie called The Endless Summer, the Beach Boys going around the world looking for a perfect wave. And I still remember watching that. They found the perfect wave off South Africa. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to go around the world looking for a perfect mountain. And so that night in the chemistry library, there was a globe, and I planned an endless winter that would start in the fall in Europe, and then go to Africa and climb mountains, and then up to Asia, to Afghanistan, India, Nepal, then go down to the Great Barrier Reef for some diving, and then to New Zealand. And then I thought I'd go on to graduate school to my postdoctoral work. Well, my thesis was late, because theses often are, so I missed Europe. But indeed, I did spend 15 months climbing high mountains all around the world, just as I had imagined that night after watching The Endless Summer. And we climbed the highest peaks in Africa, in Karongo, Uganda, Ethiopia. We did first ascents, 4 first ascents in Kashmir, attempted these mountains which had never been climbed, and did pretty much what I had dreamed up that night. And that really encouraged me, the idea that you can have a vision of something that seems impossible and make it happen. And that's really, I'd say, the 2 guiding principles of my life have been having a vision and tikkun olam, which is Hebrew for healing the world. And I've always wanted to do that. And in the beginning, it was in the mountains, and then more recently, it's been with scientific research work and policy. So I continued climbing high mountains, and everything changed on a high mountain in India. This is a mountain called Trishul near Nanda Devi. It's about 7,000 meters, 23,000 feet. I was climbing with some of the world's best climbers. As you can see, it's not a difficult peak. And I'm a slow walker. I got to the summit a bit on the lake side. And when I got there, the people there said, the lead climber, a young man named Bruce Carson, who was at that point America's best rock climber. He was the first person to pioneer climbing the steep faces in Yosemite Valley without using pitons. So he led people like Royal Robbins and Yvon Chouinard up these grade 6s, really hard rock climbs that they didn't believe they could do without pitons. And he got to the summit first of Trishul, and he thought perhaps there was a higher summit, and he walked across this ridge to look and walked out here over what was snow, but really was a cornice over air and fell to his death. In those days, India kept maps secret. We didn't really know the topography of the mountains, and where we were easy, and we had no idea on the other side, there was a 5,000-foot vertical wall with a cornice over it. And so this was incredibly tragic. Bruce was just 23, and I was heartbroken and depressed. And at that point, I was a postdoctoral fellow at Stanford studying how proteins fold, and had come up with a new model of protein folding that turned out to be right, helped start the field of protein folding, NMR. But at the time, I thought this was all meaningless, and I wanted to do something for the world in honor of Bruce and his death. And I learned that the flame retardant that was in kids' pajamas then, it was 10% of the weight of the pajamas that pretty much all kids were wearing, was a flame retardant called brominated tris. And I was worried because it looked like a sort of molecule that could change DNA, could cause cancer. We found a little girl who had never worn the tris-treated pajamas. Her mom got her pajamas in the UK. And so we asked the mom if the little girl could wear tris-treated pajamas. And she said, sure. I mean, could wear pajamas, sorry. Yes, could wear tris-treated pajamas. So we put her in the tris-treated pajamas, collected her urine. The first morning, the little girl's urine had breakdown products from the pajamas, and they were cancer-causing chemicals. And every day she wore the pajamas, the level went up. And when she stopped wearing them, the level went down. And so we realized to our horror that pretty much every kid in America, this was about 1975, was wearing these pajamas. And we checked to see if the chemical was a mutagen. It did change DNA. It was a likely carcinogen. We thought we have to write a scientific paper and tell the parents of America about these terrible pajamas. And then I got invited to this mountain. I always like to ask, does anyone know what this mountain is? I'll ask Gabriel. Gabriel, do you know what mountain this is? You're on mute. Do you want to go off? Please go off mute if you're going to tell me. Gabriel's still on mute. Oh, well, maybe he can't answer. Okay, maybe everybody's on mute. Anyway, it's Mount Everest. And at that point, Everest had only been climbed once by Americans. I was the first American woman to get a chance to climb Everest. So I had a terrible decision. Did I go try to climb Mount Everest, or did I stay and tell the parents of America about the toxic flame retardants in their children's pajamas? So I thought about it and decided I could do both. So while we were climbing on the big Khumbu ice fall in Everest and crossing big ladders, and in those days, we were the only expedition on Everest. You've all seen these pictures of all these people going up Everest at once, but in those days, the whole mountain had one group, our group. And I know we have reunions and we were just horrified to see what Everest looks like now, but we had the whole mountain. And we're climbing steep ice, and here we are in the great comb of Everest. And every day after I climbed, I would go to my tent and I would write my paper about the toxic flame retardants in kids' pajamas. This is my high point on Everest. It was about 24,500 feet. And on the left is a Petri dish that doesn't have any of the toxic tris. So there are few mutations, few colonies. And the one on the right blowing in the wind was the tris petri dish, which did have flame retardants and did have mutations in the DNA. So I finished the paper high on Everest. Male runners took it to Kathmandu. It was sent to the US, and we reached the summit in October of 1976, the American bicentennial Everest expedition. We were the second American team to climb Everest. I set an altitude record for an American woman at that point. And our paper was published right at the beginning of January in 1977. And the subtitle says a lot about what our institute does now. It says the main flame retardant in children's pajamas is a mutagen and should not be used. So for those of you who read scientific papers, you know that most papers end with the same recommendation: more study is needed. And here we've done one study, and we had shown that this flame retardant was mutagen and made a strong recommendation that it not be used. And that's what we do at our institute. We do good science, make recommendations, and things change. And back in the 70s, 3 months after our paper, tris treated children's garments were banned by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. However, brominated tris was banned, and the replacement was a very similar chemical called chlorinated tris. That's what you call a regrettable substitute, a substitute you can just drop in that's similar in structure, function, and also harm. And we did some more studies, wrote another paper. Chlorinated tris was banned from use in pajamas in 1978. But what we didn't know is that it was used in furniture until very recently, and we will come back to that. So meanwhile, on the way back from Everest, at that point, all the world's highest mountains, 8,000 meters, had been climbed, and by men, but women had not yet climbed any 8,000 meter peaks. So I applied for a permit for Annapurna I, which I hoped would be the easiest of the 8,000 meter peaks. It was the first one ever climbed, but it turns out it's probably the hardest. We did climb Annapurna with the women's team. I wrote my book, Annapurna Women's Place, about it. And then my next big adventure was I always wanted to visit all the places in the Himalayas without doing these long bus rides up from the plains on these curvy roads. I get motion sick. And I came up with the idea of walking across Bhutan, Sikkim, Nepal, and India, and made a plan, and met Hugh Swift, who had written a guide to the Himalayas and Karakoram, and said he thought he could find the route. And so together, Hugh and I spent nearly a year walking up and down across the grain of the land, starting in Bhutan. Everywhere we seemed to come to on a very auspicious day. This was the big archery festival in Bhutan when we got started. And most everywhere we were, they'd never seen Westerners ever before. So we had incredible Himalayan hospitality. The one day we were in Gangtok, Sikkim, the young Dalai Lama was giving a talk on how to live your life with care for the world. And I always see this and feel so sad that he never had the opportunity to lead his people. We crossed into Nepal on Dog Tihar, the Day of the Dog. And from all this, I started the Berkeley Himalayan Fair. I don't know if any of you have attended that. It's been going on since 1983, and it will happen this year, May 21st and 22nd in Live Oak Park in Berkeley, California. You can go to Himalayan Fair on the website if you want more information. I hope some of you might like to come down to the fair. My booth is right across the stage from the stage where the entertainment is. So come to my booth and say hello. So that's, I think, 3 weeks from today and yesterday. So maybe a few of you will come to the fair. So I have written 2 books, Annapurna Women's Place, about the women's expedition of Annapurna, Breaking Trail, A Climbing Life. And so I have been talking so slowly. It is now 5 to 11. So how much time do we have left? I was going to tell you about my mountains and molecules, but am I out of time?
No, ma'am. You keep going on. Consider maybe another 15 minutes is the max, okay?
Okay, great. Thank you. So when I wrote Breaking Trail, it was a story of, I had a very tough childhood trying to connect my childhood to my science and my mountaineering. But at that point, I had stopped my scientific work. It had been 26 years since I did science. And in 1980, when Reagan became president, he took the solar panels off the White House, and all the people doing the kind of work I did were pretty much fired and their grants were taken away. I probably would have been Carter's toxic chemical advisor if he had been elected. But with Reagan, it seemed like a bad time to do what I did, which was reducing harm from toxics. So I started having adventures and raised my daughter. So when she was starting college, it was 2006. And I just finished writing my book, which took me 20 years, a big personal therapy project. I always say anybody who reads my book will know more about me than I knew when I started. And so I thought, I wonder, all I can do maybe is clean test tubes in a lab. Haven't done science for 26 years. But I learned that that same chlorinated tris we'd gotten out of kids' pajamas was back in the nation's furniture. And now I'm going to tell you about since 2006, which has been for me every day an adventure like climbing Annapurna. When you're roped on a mountain like Annapurna and somebody slips, you can all die. So it's a real bond. And right now I work with some of the best scientists, business people, academics, and NGOs all over the world. And our summit is a healthy world. And we really can't slip for the health of the world. So the problem is that there are more than 80,000 chemicals on the market today, and chemical production is increasing worldwide. And when remember I talked about how when brominated tris was phased out, it was replaced with chlorinated tris. Well, that's what's called a regrettable substitute. The flame retardant on the left, the decabromo ether, if you have an old TV, the plastic will be about 15% by weight, this decabromo ether. And when you watch your TV, the chemicals come out, end up in dust, end up in you. So it was phased out because of harm, but the substitute, almost identical on the right, the decabromo ethane, has replaced it. So if you have a newer TV, it's about 15% by weight, the molecule on the right. So what do? There are thousands of chemicals. It takes years of research and advocacy just to regulate one. And when you regulate it, it's replaced with the chemical cousin, the regrettable substitute. So a lot of us knew this. And back in 2013, we organized a retreat with leaders from government, business, academia, NGOs. And we came up with an idea to solve this problem, sorting these thousands of chemicals into classes or families. And we came up with 6 classes or families that have a majority of the harmful chemicals in everyday products. And back in 2013, this was a revolutionary concept, but it's been accepted now by government and business worldwide. It's very useful. And I would encourage everyone who's interested in learning more, the 6 classes, we have a 4-minute video in each of them and a 4-minute introduction. So you can go to 6classes.org, and in 7 times 4, half an hour, you can learn what are the harmful chemicals, where are they used, why are they harmful, and what you can do to reduce your exposure and help make the world healthier. So I always say, please go to 6classes.org to learn more. And when you do, a screen will pop up asking if you want to sign up for my monthly newsletter. And please do, and you'll hear from me every month with interesting information about chemicals and being healthier. And if you don't like getting things every month, you can go to arleneblum.com, my personal website, and I have a quarterly newsletter, only 4 times a year, where I will tell you to come to the Himalayan Fair or maybe join me occasionally in Nepal or other things, plus, of course, some highlights on chemicals. So maybe someone will put those in the chat. And I hope some of you will sign up for the newsletters, either the monthly one on chemicals or my personal quarterly one. So if a chemical's in these classes, we sometimes need to use them, but we want to say, is it necessary? Do we really need this chemical? If you say to a mom, you can have a beautiful stain repellent white shag carpet and drop chocolate milkshakes on it, but the chemicals will be in your child's body for years to come and they're cancer causing, she might decide it's not worth having a white shag carpet and go for a chocolate colored speckled carpet that doesn't need these chemicals. And if she really wants the white carpet, then you say, is there a safer alternative? And that's where green chemistry comes in. So I'm going to tell you today briefly about two of these classes. My favorite is called PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And I always say it's my favorite because it's the best and the worst class of chemicals. There's about 10,000 PFAS, and they all have a really strong bond between carbon and fluorine, the strongest bond in the periodic table. And that means that these chemicals have good properties like oil and water repellency. They make Teflon, they make Gore-Tex, but they're forever chemicals. They never break down. And all the ones that have been studied are toxic. So a great movie, I don't know if any of you have seen it, it's called Dark Waters, and I recommend it. It came out right before the pandemic, so not as many people saw it as should have, but it tells, it's with a lawyer, story of a lawyer named Rob Bilott, who we work with often, and he's played by Mark Ruffalo. His wife is Anne Hathaway. It's a great film, and you can learn a lot about PFAS. So unfortunately, PFAS are in all of us, and exposure has been linked to several kinds of cancer, high cholesterol, obesity, immune suppression, and many more harmful conditions. So we really don't want them. I first learned about them, of course, trekking in the Himalayas back in 2012, reading this book, Stain-Resistant, Nonstick, Waterproof, and Lethal, The Hidden Dangers of C8. And I came back and I started a scientist group. Nobody knew about them then. I Googled them, there was almost nothing, but the scientists working on them knew how bad they were. And so we started a monthly scientist call, which is every month. We've had this call since 2013, where we've shared science and policy ideas on solving the PFAS problem. In 2015, we wrote a statement signed by several hundred scientists, and then we communicated it widely. And this brought PFAS to the greater audience. The National Geographic, Nick Kristof wrote about it. The thing that changed everything was a New York Times magazine cover story, The Lawyer Who Became DuPont's Worst Nightmare, which is the story of Rob Bilott, which led to the movie Dark Waters. And that New York Times article led to a lot of pressure on the EPA to set a health level for PFAS. At the same time, in our scientist group, we had some EPA scientists who said there seemed to be a lot of PFAS in a lot of drinking water. And I said, well, why don't we see if we can trace back to where the PFAS came from? And so we wrote a paper together that by now I think has been downloaded 40,000 times, a very popular paper tracing back from PFAS in drinking water to places where PFAS is manufactured, airports where it's used in firefighting foam, and wastewater treatment plants where it accumulates from upstream. And at this point, the EPA did set an advisory level, and using that level, we said 6 million people's drinking water was contaminated with PFAS. And that brought it to really the awareness of the world, and the world's very aware now. Again, there was a regrettable substitute. The PFAS with 8 carbons was phased out because it was so harmful. It actually took 50 years from when the harm was first found in 1965 till it was phased out in 2015. And then it was replaced with the C6 on the right with similar health harm. Just an example, in Michigan, Wolverine treated leather with Scotchgard, and the scrap was dumped in the sludge applied to fields, and the drinking water of those communities was more than 800 times the EPA health advisory level. And in fact, the state of Michigan sued 3M, who sold them the PFAS. I think they won about an $80 million suit. And then Wolverine sued 3M, who made the PFAS, and they also won. So there's lots and lots of lawsuits now all over the country about this PFAS contamination. Treating water so people can have clean drinking water can cost millions of dollars to build the plants and to operate them. So we say PFAS are problematic, difficult to clean up, prevention's preferable. I teach PFAS 101 in the House and the Senate. We do a monthly webinar, and I always first talk about the harm and then talk about some great ways the problem's being solved. We work with Keen Shoes in Portland, Oregon. They decided they wanted to remove all their PFAS. They call it PFCs in the outdoor industry. They looked and discovered they had PFAS in their shoes in 101 places, and 70 of them weren't necessary. So about 2/3 of the places where these chemicals are used, they're usually not even needed. They're just there for marketing. And just stopping the use of the unnecessary ones would be huge for the health of everyone in our country, because these are in so many products and they're harming everyone's health. But Keen went ahead, removed the 70 immediately, and then took years and millions of dollars to find replacements for the others. And Keen Shoes have no PFAS. And they have been working to share this with the world. They had a full-page ad in the New York Times on World Water Day on their green plan on how to get rid of PFAS. And I'm working with them to help the outdoor industry phase it out. There's unfortunately a lot used in the outdoor industry. We wrote a paper back in 2017 finding PFAS used in packaging of fast food. It's for stain and grease repellency. It's used inside microwave popcorn. But we wrote our paper, we publicized it, and then Senator Blumenthal wrote letters to the CEOs of all the major fast food companies saying, why are you using this PFAS? And he never got answers to his letters, but they have all pretty much phased it out. We heard from someone at McDonald's, as soon as they read our paper, got these letters, we had a one-day workshop for the supply chain for fast food back in February of 2017. Once that happened, the industry knew they were going to have to find substitutes, and it's taken several years, but McDonald's, Wendy's, most of the fast food restaurants are out of it. And there's the country of Denmark was the first country to ban PFAS. And again, we were working with them. And there's legislation now all around the country to stop the use of PFAS in food packaging. Yeah, oh, here's some of the states and when they phased it out. Carpeting was the major source of exposure for children because they crawl on the carpet, they get exposed to PFAS. We worked with the carpet industry. They're all in Dalton, Georgia, and we persuaded them to come to the David Brower Center in Berkeley. And they had all gone from a long chain, the C8 to the C6, thought they'd solved the problem. We told them they hadn't, that the C6 was just as bad. They had to stop the use of all PFAS. They didn't like us very well in the beginning, but ultimately at the end of a one-day meeting, the US carpet industry decided to phase out all PFAS. And they did they said by January 1st, 2020. And we knew that they had when in September 2019, Home Depot advertised they would not sell rugs and carpets containing any PFAS, which they couldn't have done if the carpet industry hadn't decided to phase it out a couple years earlier. So again, this was taking good science, sharing it with manufacturers and helping them to change. And now the carpet industry loves us. They're so glad they're out of PFAS. They gave us a big award. We discovered last June, we looked at cosmetics. About half of them had PFAS, particularly things like waterproof mascara, foundation, lipstick. We wrote a paper, and the same day the paper went online, we arranged to have the no PFAS in cosmetics bills in both the House and the Senate, bipartisan legislation, which hasn't gone anywhere. However, we had a large press conference with 60 people from the cosmetics industry being told they had to remove PFAS from their cosmetics. And from what we've heard, they are. So if anyone gets as interested in PFAS as I am, we have another website called PFAS Central with the latest news, science policy about PFAS. And the most popular page is PFAS Free, which lists brands that are PFAS free. We made it for all these communities that have been drinking PFAS contaminated water and asked for PFAS free products. Okay, quickly, I'm going to talk about flame retardants and my last class. Back in the 70s, there was a lot of fires and people smoked and people thought, let's put flame retardants in everything. And they did. And nobody asked if the flame retardants provided a benefit. They often don't. And are they harmful? And they're usually quite harmful. So this is a standard in California that all furniture had to meet, that said the foam inside a couch had to resist a small flame for 12 seconds. And it turns out there was no fire safety benefit, because if you drop a candle on your couch, the fabric burns first. And all the furniture in North America, pretty much 5% of the weight of foam was a toxic flame retardant, like tris. Indeed, it was tris in some cases. These chemicals are associated with serious health harm to our population. Pregnant women are the most vulnerable. It alters thyroid hormones during critical windows of brain development. The average American child, a number of studies have shown, has lost 3 to 5 IQ points due to flame retardants that were in furniture and were in their moms. The flame retardants come out of products into dust. You eat a sandwich, you eat flame retardants. Children who crawl in the dust have much higher levels than adults. Cats who groom their fur have high levels. No fire safety benefit for whether the foam meets the standard or doesn't. We tried to change the standard 4 times in California. At that point, I had just begun our institute. I was working for free. It was me and my cats. The chemical industry spent $23 million stopping us from being successful. This was the kind of advertising they did, claiming that if they took flame retardants out of furniture, it was a deadly mistake. We wrote scientific papers finding most children's products at that point had flame retardants. Children's nursing pad was 15% by weight chlorinated tris. We got support from the furniture industry when they had no idea about the harm. They knew the flame retardants didn't work, but when we explained the harm, they supported us. And then the thing that changed everything, the Chicago Tribune did this great series, 10 front page stories. And the headline on the first says it all. A deceptive campaign by industry brought toxic flame retardants into our homes and into our bodies, and the chemicals don't even work as promised. And I had meanwhile started hiking. Jerry Brown was governor. I started hiking with his senior advisor who lived near me in Berkeley and had a dog. So we went hiking. And in those days, anyone who went hiking with me got a huge earful about the toxic flame retardants. But the governor couldn't do anything because the flame retardant industry, were just terrible and would have advertised he was burning down the state. But after this story came out, they couldn't do that. And just a couple of weeks after the Chicago Tribune series started, Jerry Brown started changing the standard. And now if you go buy furniture, you'll see a label saying that it contains no added flame retardants. The change was about 2014. So furniture purchased since then should be fine. Before then, probably it has a TB117 label and has flame retardants. And one can just swap out the foam. Foam stores have flame retardant-free furniture and flame retardant-free foam, and you can swap out the foam if you're worried about your couch. So an award that I think didn't make it onto my resume, but the most glamorous night of my life. Flame retardant can be glamorous. There's Jerry Brown, and I was inducted into the California Hall of Fame. That's Robert Redford on the left and Joan Baez on the right, some of my heroes. And it was for helping get flame retardants out of furniture. So I hope some of you will check out our websites, Green Science Policy, PFAS Central, if you want to learn more about PFAS, 6classes.org to watch the videos, down arleneblum.com if you want to sign up for my quarterly newsletter or our monthly newsletters. So I think I exactly did 15 minutes. Thank you, George, for the extra time, and I'm ready for any questions.
That was great. Want to remind those on the Zoom that you need to put either an alert in chat that you've got a question, or you can put your question in chat. But I'm going to take advantage of being the first one with the mic. Dr. Blum, are there any chemical companies that are actually taking a leadership position in finding substitutes?
Oh, there's so many wonderful small entrepreneurs and chemical entrepreneurs. I'm on the advisory board for a venture fund called Safer Made that invests in safer alternatives. So for example, I just bought a black diamond jacket and it said that it was, you know, PFAS free. And so I asked the founder of Safer Made, I said, do you think it's really PFAS free? And he said, yes. Two of our companies, one of them made the water coat treatment and the other one made the membrane. So there are lots of small ones. But unfortunately, DuPont, Dow, those big companies don't like me. They really continue pushing these old chemicals. And in fact, I didn't include this. I had an op-ed in the New York Times a while back talking about how climate change, plastic pollution, and chemicals are all related. They're all petrochemical based. And as we're using less gas, the petrochemical companies are promoting more plastic and more toxic chemicals. So they're all together, and it's promoted by the big petrochemical companies, but lots of small, great innovators.
Okay,
Great.
do we have any
Question?
questions in the auditorium?
Hold on for a minute, I'll get you his mic.
Thank you. Good morning. And the first thing I want to say is thank you so much for your service to humanity as a whole and the earth. And I think that raising people's consciousness can always be challenging. My question for you is with regards to the use of plasma ozone. I understand that there are safe ozone machines that are out there that do not create nitrogens, that do remove chemicals, including heavy metal toxicity, petrochemicals from the water source, from also our environments. And they are increasingly popular, I think, in California since the fires that we had up here in 2017 through 2021. They certainly were used by local car dealerships, medical offices since COVID started. I wanted to get you to weigh in on what you thought of plasma ozone machines that are non-nitrogen producing machines as chemical removants.
I'm sorry, but you know way more about it than I do. I apologize. I don't know anything about that. I will say that we also work on antimicrobials. I'm going to do a related thing I know something about that might be interesting to you because I can't answer your question. But we do work on antimicrobials like quaternary ammonium salts. And unfortunately, because of COVID, they are being really overused and being, you know, fogging universities and nursery schools. So there's a big overuse of antimicrobials in the air and in products where they're not necessary, and they're harmful because things that kill bacteria tend not to be good for us. But I don't know anything about this. I should probably know something about it. So I apologize. I can't help with that question.
We have a specific question here on Zoom. Airline seats are supposedly non-flammable.
Oh, sure. Transportation has flame retardants. And in fact, one of our current projects, most of our projects are things that sort of seem impossible, like climbing Annapurna. So our current impossible project is, we learned, so Tris, remember, was in kids' pajamas, was in our furniture. In 2011, OEHA here in California, the Office of Environmental Health and Hazard Assessment, they list something, they have a list, what they call Prop 65, maybe you've seen the warnings of things that are cancer causing, and they listed Tris as cancer causing. And so people stopped putting it in products, but there was an exemption for transportation. So Tris was the major flame retardant used in all of our cars, automobiles, which means particularly on a warm day when you're in your car, you might be breathing Tris, not good. So it's out of people's furniture, which is great, but still in automobiles, probably planes. I haven't looked. We looked at some BART seats, very rapid transport. Yes. So we are working with the automobile industry to try to get the standard changed. The chemicals are there in cars to meet a standard from the 1960s that does not provide fire safety. And nonetheless, everyone has this in their cars. And the US standard is unfortunately internationally harmonized, which means the whole world has this in their cars. And we don't know if it was tris until recently. There were studies that if people wore silicon bands, if they drove more, there was more tris on their bands. But that was a couple years ago. And we heard perhaps that they've changed to an even worse flame retardant. So anyway, we're doing a study of 100 cars right now, and we will have the results soon and publish a peer-reviewed paper and really publicize it, and then work with what's called NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Authority, who are very reluctant to change. We've met with them a few times and not gotten anywhere. It's very hard to change things like standards that are internationally harmonized. But we would really like to change the standard for cars. Planes, I don't know what the standard is. I imagine it's more severe, and it's very likely met with a chemical like that. One is not in a plane as much as a car. I don't worry as much about planes as I do about cars. So again, a long answer, not quite what you asked.
Is there a generic role for the Environmental Protection Agency here?
Oh, very important. And the EPA is led by some great people now. The appointments have been really, really, really good under this current administration. My favorite person from the Senate, who knew, a PhD who knew everything about chemicals, now leads the chemical group at the EPA, which is such good news. But the EPA moves slowly. They have a lot of hoops they have to jump through to be able to change anything. But I think they're doing, they could do better, but they're doing a pretty good job. But it's a slow process. But for things like flame retardants, the problem is the standard. If there's a standard that says you have to have flame retardants, then you'll go from, brominated tris to chlorinated tris and on and on. So with flame retardants, you have to have good standards. And then there's a huge battle if you try to change the standard. There was an ugly battle for like 6 years in Sacramento until Jerry Brown changed the standard, during which and after he changed the standard, the flame retardant industry sued the state of California on behalf of our fire safety, very kind of them, to say that California did not have the right to go to a new standard. The new standard actually is more fire safe. It stops fires in the foam before it reaches, in the fabric around the couch, around the cushion before it reaches the foam. So the new standard gives us more fire safety with no flame retardants. Nonetheless, they tried to sue the state and lost. So it is a problem. Flame retardants, for example, are extremely profitable and have a very unscrupulous industry.
Okay, any questions?
As a one-time practicing organic chemist, I'm always sensitive to the public's perception that chemistry is bad. Chemists are doing wonderful things for everything in our life. It's progress everywhere. Genetic engineering, DNA, all of that. But the chemistry is oftentimes tied in with what industry does, and that's more of a business thing. And it always bothers me that the public seems to perceive that chemists are not doing good stuff. Lots of things that chemists invent and create that are intended to be good, there's unintended consequences that come about after a bit. And that's something that chemists have to work, as you point out correctly, to improve the situation. That's what we do. And I mentioned, when we talk about carcinogens, you mentioned Bruce Ames, and I used to talk to him a lot about the carcinogen that were available as a natural thing in our fruits and vegetables. And in some cases, Bruce Ames had found, according to his mutagenic testing, that the levels of carcinogens occurring just in our foods by Mother Nature were in some cases far greater in amounts and even toxicity or carcinogenicity than the trace amounts of things that were left in sprays on vegetables in the grocery store, which ultimately led to organic, quote unquote.
So let me interrupt you just because I have comments to all these things you said and I'm going to forget. First, I completely agree that chemistry is great. I'm a chemist. I love chemicals, good chemicals. We have to distinguish. I also agree that, there are harmful natural chemicals. So maybe there are also things in these natural products that help them not be as harmful to us. I think the thing about eating organic, it's true. We don't get that harmed by the trace amounts of chemicals left on food. I think the reason though is the workers who are exposed. When they're spraying these sprays, fumigants, for example, we don't have it when we eat the food, but it is really harmful for the farm workers. So I don't think we have time to discuss that now, but I mostly agree with you. And Safer Made, which I'm on the board for, is working on healthier chemicals. There's just, people don't like to change. And a lot of the old, there are as I said, we just did 6 classes that contain the majority of the harmful chemicals in everyday products. So most chemicals are fine, but there are some bad ones, and it's good to know what they are. And unfortunately, the bad ones are often the profitable ones. And that's not about the chemists, it's about the chemical business. But so I agree, chemicals can be wonderful. Anyway, so I didn't want to interrupt, but you said so many interesting things.
Okay, Gabriel had a comment he wanted to add.
Well, let me just start off by saying wonderful talk, Arlene, and thank you so much for what you're doing to make us have a safer life here and live vicariously on top of mountains. But my talk here in Oakmont Village Association, we are being urged to use flame retarding paint on our houses and on the bushes outside. And my contractor says it's all the tests show that it maybe saves 2 seconds or something. It's not really going to do any use for us. And I don't know what the toxicity is in those and whether there are safer alternatives to try and make our houses more fire resistant.
Well, I'd be really interested in looking at some flame retardant paint because we're actually working a lot on building materials now. Building materials are one of the largest sources of world contamination. And so paint has PFAS in it, and we have actually been studying many, many paint samples for PFAS. But we should, at the same time, we should look for flame retardant. So you have given me a new research project. Thank you. Often flame retardants only do give you a couple seconds, like the ones in furniture would give you 2 seconds, and they would make the fire. When the flame retardants burn, it increases the smoke, soot, and toxic gases. So you might get 2 seconds, but then your fire is smokier, sootier, and more toxic. So firefighters, interestingly, have been one of our strongest allies in changing these standards, because firefighters have very high levels of cancer, and they're young, really high, and they're young, strong, healthy people, but they're exposed to all the toxics from burning flame retardants. So I'm actually really interested in that. I'm going to make a note to tell our young PhD who's in charge of flame retardants that we should look into paint. In fact, if you want to write me a few brands or anything, we'll buy some and test it, because I would like to find out what flame retardants, maybe it'll tell that they're using.
Please send the information to us.
Pardon?
Where she wants us to send it.
Yeah, if you have any information,
Yes.
maybe your contractor would have they usually have an MSDS that tells you what the ingredients are and what the toxicity is. If you could ask him, that would just save us a little effort, and I'd remember. But I think that would be a really good, I'd be happy to look into it and tell you, because a lot of this, as I said, with those 6 classes, when you look, about 2/3 of the use is marketing. For example, everybody wants antimicrobial cutting boards and antimicrobial counters. Well, it does absolutely no good. And indeed, these antimicrobials are in many, I think most women's breast milk, you end up with antimicrobials where you really don't want it. So when you use these harmful chemicals, they end up in places you don't want them. And if there's no benefit, remember the Keen shoes, 2/3 of the times it was just for marketing. So I don't know about your paint. I have no idea, but I would love to look into it because, yeah, the flame retardants are so profitable that the companies that make them, and they're just 3 companies who sort of have a global monopoly, and they do anything they can to promote the use. So it's quite possible there's no value, like your contractor said. So, I wouldn't presume to say that. It sounds, you have fires, you don't want fires. It sounds good. It always sounds good, but who knows? But
We have a question here at Berger.
Go.
Yes, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. I think we're all so grateful. Something that you just, this last response that you had triggered something in my mind, that some of the new fire insurance policies that are out there now basically waive an individual homeowner's right to say, no, I don't want fire retardant put on my house. Insurance companies, I don't know if you're aware of this, are increasingly putting in policies that that's a given. Should they feel that they need to do that,
wow.
they stipulate. So that's another area you might want to be aware of.
Could you send me, if you send me something specific, it would be really helpful.
Sure, I will.
So my young scientist in charge of flame retardants is just getting a few new projects here. So, but anything you can send would be great because yet another use of flame retardants I had not thought of. Mostly when we look, one of our big unsuccesses is building insulation. So EPS, XPS, all foam plastic insulation has flame retardants, and there's no fire safety benefit, I can assure you. And we tried to change that standard. We got California passed legislation against the bitter opposition of the flame retardant industry that the state fire marshal could waive the requirement for flame retardants when there was no proven benefit. And I won't even tell you how ugly the story got, but we spent so much resources and energy doing testing and proving there was no benefit 6 different ways. And ultimately it actually passed in California only because Jerry Brown was in favor. Insulation below the surface of the soil where there's no fire source, no oxygen, doesn't need flame retardants. And then we tried to pass for the US and Canada, and it was defeated 11-1, which is the flame retardant industry, and we gave up. So that's the project I put the most energy into that absolutely didn't work. It's really tough, and I'm sure the paint would be really tough because it's probably a big profit center, or maybe it has a benefit. I hope it does have a benefit. That would be the good news if there is a benefit. So I hope that turns out to be true, but we will definitely look into it.
Arlene, I think we're getting to the end. I have one final question on Zoom. How is your organization financed?
So we have a number of generous foundations and a number of generous funders. In the beginning, it was me and Molly. Molly was my helper. And I will say in the beginning, I was working for free with Molly's help. And that was when the chemical industry spent $23 million documented in Sacramento. So it was ugly. But since then, because we have accomplished a lot, we are funded. We do have individual funders. And I could just say, if anybody wants to contribute, we always appreciate it. I think if you go to greensciencepolicy.org, there's an opportunity, or if you get on our mailing list. So we have, individuals and foundations, and we're very appreciative. And we are adequately funded now. We have 10 people, lots of bright young scientists, and I feel really lucky. I started this when I was 61, and it turns out I'm really good at it, and I might have never known. So I feel it's a real blessing to have this opportunity to help make the world a better place for kitties and everyone else. So I'm very
Arlene,
fortunate.
before we wrap down, we had a few people that came here because they have either had your class or had an experience with you. And where is my, come on up here. Because they can't see you, we have to bring them up and change them this way. So why don't you say hello? I think she has your book here.
Hi, who is that? I can't see anybody.
Hi. What do I, this way? Okay. Hi, Arlene. You don't know me, but I notice in your audience in person are a lot of hikers from Oakmont. And you started me on my hiking experiences way back in I think it was the early 80s. You taught an extension class at Berkeley, and it was just inspirational to me. And I have your book, and you autographed it. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, maybe I can come up and go hiking sometime after COVID subsides. Maybe, Gabriel, if I contact you, you could arrange for me to go hiking.
Thank you, Arlene, so much. I want to give a couple little wrap up. First of all, thank you for all your work you do on our behalf. Turn your phones back on. You do that now. And also remember, we're not here next week for Mother's Day, but Tom Tremont will be the following speaker for the Magic Show. Please do come in person for that show. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.